Imagine it's June 29th, 2007. You've been standing in a line that wrapped around the block since before sunrise. It's brutally hot. People brought folding chairs. People brought coolers. And at 6 o'clock, the doors finally open. And a while later, you walk back out into the evening holding a small black slab of glass and aluminum that just cost you $500. It plays your music. It shows you maps. It puts the whole internet into your palm. But here's the thing nobody in that line quite realizes yet. It can't play a single game. No store to buy them from. No buttons to press. Nothing. You're holding the very first iPhone. And within a few short years, this thing becomes the most successful video game machine ever built. The device that swallows the arcade, the handheld, and half the living room whole. And on the day it's born, it can't even run solitaire. And that's where we start this week. But this week also gave us the loot-soaked dungeon crawler that taught a whole generation to click, a strange little dream on a dying Sega console, a Bandicoot rebuilt from the ground up, and the slow-motion fall of the studio that built Diablo. We're talking about all this and more on This Week in Video Game History. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, Doug Coleman, and this week we are covering June 29th through July 5th. It's a week that handed us the loot and click dungeon crawler that swallowed entire summers, a brutally hard PlayStation hero rebuilt from the ground up 2 decades on, a beautiful, strange dream on a Sega console that was already circling the drain, and a whole fistful of games that didn't live on a console or a computer at all. They lived in your pocket. And because the calendar just flipped to July, we're going to be doing something brand new this episode. We're going to have a quick run through of a few games we can only pin down to the month, not the day. I'm calling it sometime in July. Then we slow down for 2 bigger stories. How a phone became the most powerful game machine on Earth, and how the team behind one of the biggest PC games of all time walked out the door, stumbled, and clawed their way back. So grab your controller and press start to continue. Here is a short-ish list of games that came out during the week of June 29th through July 5th across gaming history. 7 games, and for the first time on this show, several of them never touched a console or a computer at all. They lived in your pocket. We're walking the week from one end to the other, the 29th through the 5th. Let's run it. On June 29th, 2000, Blizzard released Diablo II, and a whole lot of people, including myself, did not sleep right for about a year. The pitch was almost insultingly simple. Click on monsters until they explode into loot. Pick up the loot, find bigger monsters. But underneath that was one of the most finely tuned compulsion loops ever built. 5 character classes, randomized dungeons that were different every single run, and a rarity system that dangled the dream of the perfect item just one more kill away. It was the game that taught a generation what just one more level actually cost you. And it didn't stay on your hard drive. Diablo II ran on Blizzard.net, Blizzard's online service, which meant your character lived on the internet. And so did everyone else's. Trading, dueling, grinding shoulder to shoulder. It became the fastest selling computer game ever made at that time. And I could sit here and wax poetically for hours about my love for this game. It came out during my last semester of college. And it definitely made it a little bit more difficult because I never wanted to go to bed. The need to grind in this game, either with friends or solo, was real. I stayed up way too late and slept through way too many classes, mainly because of this game. Those are some great times. Here's the part we're coming back to, though. The studio that built this, Blizzard North, was even at the height of all this, quietly heading for the exits. Hold that thought, though. It's one of our deep dives this week. Good news, everyone. Sorry, I won't do that again. Exactly 17 years later, on the same day, something a lot stranger showed up. and it showed up on phones. Futurama Worlds of Tomorrow was a free-to-play mobile game, but it had a secret weapon. The entire original cast came back to voice it, and the show's writers produced brand new animated story content for it. Essentially, mini episodes you unlocked by playing. It even roped in real-life guests like Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson. For a fan base that had watched the show get canceled roughly 4 times, it was a genuine, unexpected resurrection. And then, like so many mobile games, it simply switched off. The servers went dark in 2023 and the game is now essentially unplayable. Which is the strange, slightly melancholy thing about this whole new category we're adding to the show. A console game from 1996 you can still blow the dust off and boot up, but a mobile game from 2017 can just vanish. 20 years to the week after the original Crash games defined the early PlayStation, they came roaring back, rebuilt from the ground up. On June 30th, 2017, the Sane Trilogy collected the first 3 Crash Bandicoot games remade entirely in modern graphics. And remade is the right word here, not remastered, because the developers, Vicarious Visions, didn't have the complete original source code to work from. They had to reverse engineer the old games level by level, essentially rebuilding them from the inside out to match the originals exactly. It paid off spectacularly. The collection was a massive hit, reminding everyone how brutally hard those platformers actually were, and pretty much single-handedly kicked off Crash's full comeback. Sometimes the most powerful thing in gaming isn't a new idea, it's an old one, polished until it shines. Let's jump back to your pocket. On July 2nd, 2014, Firaxis and 2K released Civilization Revolution 2. And this one's a small milestone hidden in plain sight. Civilization, the legendary One More Turn strategy series, had always been a PC and console franchise. But Civ Rev 2 launched exclusively on phones and tablets first. The first game in the entire Civilization lineage built for mobile and nowhere else. No PC version waiting in the wings. You built your empire from the Stone Age to the Space Age entirely with your thumbs. It's an easy one to overlook, but it's a genuine marker of the moment the biggest names in PC gaming started taking the device in your hand a little more seriously. Not as a port, but as the main event. Our most recent game and proof just how far that pocket-sized idea would go. On July 4th, 2024, HoYoverse released Zenless Zen Zero. HoYoverse was the studio behind the global juggernaut Genshin Impact, and Zenless is their stylish, fast-twitch urban action game. You're in a city called New Eridu, brawling your way through interdimensional chaos with a roster of impossibly cool characters, all wrapped in a slick, free-to-play gacha structure. It plays on your PlayStation, your PC, and your phone, with your progress following you across all 3. And it landed like a meteor, somewhere north of 50 million downloads in its first 3 days. Whatever you make of the free-to-play model, that number is a flat-out statement about where the center of gravity in gaming has moved. And now for our obscure pick of the week, a beautiful one on a console that was already in trouble. On July 5th, 1996 in Japan, Sega released Nights into Dreams, and a quick region note here because the show cares about this, that's the Japanese date. North America wouldn't get it until August. This came from Sonic Team. Surprisingly, the people who made Sonic, led by Yuji Naka. And instead of speed, it was about flight. You play as Knights, a purple jester-like dream spirit swooping and looping through the dreams of 2 children in long, graceful, almost musical arcs. There's nothing else quite like the way it feels. And here's the detail I love. It came bundled with a brand new controller, the Saturn 3D control pad, the first analog pad Sega ever made, because Naka needed smooth, flowing, 360-degree movement to make the dream flying work. It's the same problem Mario 64 was solving that exact same year. 2 different companies arriving at the analog stick at once. But the Saturn was a commercial disaster outside Japan. badly outgunned by the PlayStation. So Knights, one of the most original games of its era, ended up a gorgeous secret most players never even got the chance to find. We closed the week back where this whole new thread lives, on mobile, on July 5th, 2018, with Identity V. A note up front, the game actually launched in China a few months earlier. July 5th is the global release date, so that's the date we're flagging. Identity V is an asymmetrical survival horror game. 4 players desperately trying to escape a map where a 5th player hunts them down. And if it sounds familiar, it should. It was built in cooperation with Behavior Interactive, the studio behind Dead by Daylight. The difference is that it ran in your hand, for free, wrapped in this gorgeous, gothic, Tim Burton by way of Victorian nightmare art style. And it became enormous, especially across Asia. And it's one of the clearest signs that the kind of competitive online hardcore experience we used to think needed a console, by 2018, it was perfectly at home on a phone, which is the perfect note to carry into our deep dives. I want to go back to that black slab of glass and aluminum from the top of the show. When the iPhone launched on June 29th, 2007, it generally could not play games, not real ones. There was no app store. If you wanted apps, Steve Jobs' official answer was that you could make little web pages that ran in the browser. That was the plan. That was the whole plan. It lasted about a year because developers immediately started jailbreaking the thing and writing their own software for it anyway. And Apple read the room. In July of 2008, the App Store opened, and that's the actual big bang of mobile gaming. Suddenly, anybody could write a game, put it in a store that lived on a device in nearly everyone's pocket, and charge $1 for it. Or charge nothing and make it back another way. And that another way is the part that rewired the entire industry. Games stopped being a thing you bought once. They became services. Free to download, endlessly updated, monetized through the people who couldn't stop playing. Within a few years, that model wasn't just some mobile sideshow, it became, by raw revenue, the largest part of the entire video game business. Bigger than consoles, bigger than PC. The whole industry tilted towards the phone. How a device that shipped unable to run a single game ended up the most successful gaming machine ever made, and what we gained and lost when games became something that lives on a screen in your pocket, that's a story we're going to tell properly another time. Now back to Diablo II and the studio that made it. Diablo II came out June 29th, 2000, and it made Blizzard North one of the most respected studios on the planet. These were the people who basically invented the modern click and loot dungeon crawler. And they should have been untouchable. Instead, they spent the next few years watching their company get bought and sold over their heads. Passed between corporate owners they'd never met, fighting over creative control of Diablo III. And in 2003, the studio's founders, David Brevik and the Schaefer brothers, finally had enough. They quit, walked out the door, and 2 years later, Blizzard shut down Blizzard North completely. So they did the obvious thing. They started a new studio, Flagship, to make their next game, and it was a disaster. The game, Hellgate London, tried to be everything at once, launched broken, and the studio collapsed into bankruptcy in 2008. The people who'd built one of the biggest PC games in history were suddenly out on the street again. Here's where it turns. Within about a day of Flagship folding, the survivors regrouped, formed a tiny new studio called Runic Games, and, in roughly 11 months on a shoestring budget, shipped Torchlight. A bright, joyful, lovingly made dungeon crawler that did exactly what they'd always done best. The exiles had found their way home. Rise, walk out, faceplant, come back. The whole long, messy story of how the people who made Diablo lost everything and rebuilt it, that's an episode all on its own that we've loved to tell you. Okay, one more thing before we wrap, and it's something brand new. Every so often on the show, I run into a game I genuinely cannot pin to a day. The history just says July 1989 and shrugs. Normally, those games fall through the cracks, so at the top of every new month, I'm going to scoop up a handful of them and give them their moment. I'm calling it Sometime in July. Here's what July gave us across the years, with no exact dates, just the month, and that's okay. Sometime in July 1987, Kid Icarus. From the team that had just made Metroid, a vertical climb up Mount Olympus as the little angel Pit. Beloved, gorgeous, and so brutally hard it has driven players to madness for almost 40 years. Also sometime in July 1987, Solomon's Key, a Tecmo puzzle platformer where you play a wizard named Dana, conjuring and destroying blocks to climb through room after room. One of those quietly fiendish games that looks gentle and absolutely is not. Sometime in July 1989, Cobra Triangle. This one's from Rare, years before they were Rare. Before GoldenEye, before Donkey Kong Country. You pilot a speedboat through whitewater, fighting sea monsters, defusing bombs, and saving swimmers. All in that slick isometric style with music by a young David Wise. And sometime in July 1990, Snake Rattle and Roll. Rare again. Wise again. You're a pair of snakes named Rattle and Roll, eating little orbs called Nibbly Pibblies to grow long enough to ring a bell and escape. It is exactly as strange as it sounds, and it rules. 4 games, 1 month, no dates required. That's sometime in July. Imagine it's June 29th, 2007. Someone walks out of a store at the end of a long, hot day, holding that little black slab of glass for the very first time. They're thrilled with it. They're showing it to everyone. And not one person in that crowd, not the buyer, not the guy who sold it to them, probably not even the people who built it, has the faintest idea that the most important game console of the next 20 years just walked out the door. A console that night couldn't play a single game. That's the thing about this week. So much of it is about not knowing what you're holding. Blizzard North didn't know, at the absolute top of their game, that they were already on their way out the door. Or that getting knocked all the way down would be the thing that let them build something joyful again. Sega didn't know that one of the most beautiful games they'd ever make would land on a console almost nobody would buy. And a generation of kids feeding cartridges into an NES on some forgotten July afternoon didn't know they were playing the early, rough, brilliant works of a studio that would go on to define the whole medium. None of them knew. They were just making the best thing they could with what they had, in the moment they had it. And that's all any of it has ever been. From a wizard climbing a tower to 2 snakes chasing nibbly pibblies to a glass rectangle that swallowed the arcade whole. The medium keeps handing us the future and forgetting to mention it. And I think getting to look back and finally say out loud that's what that was. That might be my favorite thing in the whole world. That's it for this episode. Thank you all very much for sticking around. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe over on YouTube or follow the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It genuinely helps. Artwork for the show is done, as always, by Ms. Tink. Music is produced by Shane Mandini. Go follow him on Twitch and Spotify and listen to all his great work. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me, Doug Coleman. Be sure to save your game, nerds. I'll see you next week.